I became pregnant by one of the 3 men I cheated on my husband with over 4 nights on a business trip. I suffered brutal revenge from my husband and humiliating blackmail from one of the lovers, being used for money. I met Jorge during the inauguration of a new shopping mall in Zapopan. I, Lorena, was 26 years old and already worked on large-scale events. He, at 31, was in charge of managing the commercial spaces for the project. Everything happened very quickly. He captivated me with his calm and confidence, while I captivated him with my sharp way of speaking and my calculating gaze. We did not take long to start dating, and in less than a year we were already living together. Jorge was everything my friends dreamed of: educated, financially stable, attentive, without vices, and, most importantly to me at that moment, completely obsessed with me. The wedding was celebrated 2 years later in a luxury hall in Altozano, with an impeccable ceremony that was much talked about among my agency colleagues. Jorge seemed a perfect example of an ideal husband. Working in the high-end real estate sector, he quickly became one of the most respected real estate agents in the region. We spent weekends in expensive restaurants or on getaways to Tequila, Sayulita, and even San Miguel de Allende. From the outside, we were the perfect couple. He did everything for me and I learned to play that role masterfully. But the truth is that inside something began to die. Jorge spent more time with clients on his mobile than with me. Our dinners turned into monologues where he talked about prices per square meter and signing deeds. The few times I tried to add something different to our routine, he would respond with a lazy smile and a "see you later, darling." I began to feel trapped in a decorative role of perfect wife. My sparkle, that natural magnetism that always made me stand out at events and meetings, seemed to disappear when I was with him. I, a 33-year-old woman, vain, full of energy and surrounded by interesting and stylish people all the time, started to feel invisible at home. It is not that Jorge was cruel, on the contrary. He was a good man, one of those who washed the dishes after dinner and sent flowers for no reason. But he was predictable, lukewarm, and frankly boring. The lack of conflict made everything seem plastic, a relationship where nothing bad happened, but nothing good exploded either. While I put on red lipstick in front of the mirror before any event, sometimes I would catch myself looking in the mirror and wondering who I was deceiving. Jorge treated me like a trophy he had already won and now only polished occasionally. As for me, I felt I had to prove my worth every day, not to him, but to myself. Perhaps it was the environment I worked in, so full of adrenaline, goals, inflated egos, and quick achievements. But all that made me want something more, something Jorge had not given me in a long time. There were nights when I would come back from events with my body still electrified, my heels in my hands, and my makeup intact, and Jorge would already be asleep with the TV on, softly snoring. In those moments I felt alone, even with him beside me, a kind of silent loneliness without fights, without discussions, just the invisible abyss between two people who, by keeping up appearances for so long, stopped truly seeing each other. And maybe, I thought, maybe that is what made me vulnerable to the temptations that were yet to come. The trip to Puerto Vallarta presented itself as an opportunity to make contacts and develop professionally. 3 days of conferences, brand-sponsored parties, and many familiar faces from the industry. I already knew Marco from other smaller events. He was an advertising professional in his early 30s, with that air of someone whose heart has been broken enough to know exactly how to break others. He had a sharp sense of humor, a clear gaze, and a way of looking at me as if he knew every thought I tried to hide. And that first night on the rooftop of a hotel facing the sea, with a mojito in my hand and the sea whispering below, I stopped hiding. The first time was in the elevator, quick, between kisses and muffled laughs. Nothing planned, but not accidental either. I could have said no. I could have pulled away when he grabbed my waist or when he pulled my neck with that arrogant confidence. But I did not want to. For a few minutes I felt that warmth in my chest, that excitement of being alive again. And for the first time in a long time, someone looked at me as a woman, not as a wife, partner, or symbol of stability. That night, I returned to my room with wrinkled clothes, smudged lipstick, and a throbbing body, but without a hint of guilt. What started as a slip turned into a silent routine. At subsequent events, Marco and I would look into each other's eyes before even formally greeting each other. Sometimes we did not even need to exchange words. A text message with the room number and time was enough. I knew it was wrong, of course, but it was like a drug, an addiction to adrenaline, to risk, to the feeling of being desired by someone who saw me as a conquest, not as a given. Jorge at home remained the ideal husband. He would send me messages asking if I had eaten dinner, wishing me good luck, telling me he missed me. I responded with emojis and empty words. In Tlaquepaque was the first time something changed. It was a smaller internal agency event, and I stayed with the team for 4 days. Marco was there, but this time he was not alone. Adrian, a designer with dark eyes and a raucous laugh, joined us for dinner on the second night. We drank, we laughed, and everything blended together. Without realizing it, I was between the two of them in a silent game of glances and discreet touches. The third night, Luis, another colleague from previous projects, more reserved but with a mysterious charm, joined the group. It was not planned. It just happened. A rented room with hotel beds, cheap wine, and bodies seeking pleasure without promises. On that trip I lost count of the times I had sex with them, sometimes with one, sometimes with two, sometimes with all of them on the same day. I knew I was crossing a line of no return, but the feeling of control, of power, blinded me. They praised me, touched me as if I were irresistible, and I, intoxicated by desire and the illusion of freedom, let myself go. It was no longer about love or need. It was about escaping the role of the ideal woman and losing myself in whatever version of myself I was becoming. I returned to Guadalajara with an exhausted body and a silent heart. Jorge picked me up at the airport with flowers, kissed my forehead, and commented that I felt lighter. And I smiled like someone hiding a knife in their back. My phone was full of messages from Marco and Adrian, and I knew it would not stay that way. Something inside me had changed, and although I continued to sleep in the same bed as Jorge, more and more parts of me belonged to others. It started with mild nausea at the end of the afternoon. I thought it was stress, perhaps a badly chosen dish during one of the agency's hurried lunches. But the symptoms persisted. The dizziness was accompanied by a strange sensitivity to the smell of men's perfume and strong coffee. Deep down I already knew what it was, even before taking the test. I stayed in the bathroom for minutes after seeing the positive result, as if by not breathing, reality could change. Pregnant, and for the first time in a long time, the mirror did not show me a self-assured woman, but a fearful woman. Jorge almost cried when I told him. He hugged me so tightly that I felt the guilt in my stomach more than any nausea. "We are going to be parents, darling," he said, and his eyes shone with an innocence that crushed me inside. In the following days, he seemed like a different man. He woke up earlier, read articles about fatherhood, researched baby strollers, colors for the baby's room. Every gesture of his, every loving detail, was like a silent blow to my conscience. And I smiled, I thanked him, I acted all as if I were on a stage where the audience could not know the truth. The doubt about who the father was kept me awake. I tried to make calculations, remember the dates, but everything was a haze. Those nights in Tlaquepaque had been a whirlwind of bodies and desires. Marco, Adrian, Luis, any of them could have been the father. And Jorge, so willing, so loving, painted an image of the future that crushed me. I started to avoid thinking of him as our son. It was the baby, nothing more, cold, neutral, because naming him would be admitting that I was creating a big lie inside me, a lie that kicked, grew, and stared at me from within. During prenatal checkups, Jorge would hold my hand, comment on the fetal heartbeat as if it were the 8th wonder of the world. He would bring me cut fruit for a snack and made sure to accompany me everywhere. And instead of feeling grateful, I felt panic. Every gesture of affection reminded me that he had no idea who was carrying that child. Sometimes in the silence of the dark room, I would cry silently, not for what was happening, but for what would inevitably come. Truth is like a seed. Even if buried, one day it germinates. One night Jorge rested his head on my belly and spoke to the baby. He called him my little warrior. I closed my eyes tightly and smiled as he spoke, but inside it was as if I floated outside my body, watching a woman play a role she could no longer maintain for long. I began to wonder how long this farce would last and, more importantly, if Jorge could forgive me when everything came to light. Because a secret like that, so dirty, so cowardly, could not remain hidden forever. Every day that passed, I felt the weight of the lie consuming me, but at the same time a part of me desperately clung to the illusion that maybe, just maybe, everything would turn out well, that Jorge would never find out, that the baby would be born and everything would somehow calm down, that time would erase the traces of betrayal. I wanted to believe in this fantasy. I wanted it so badly that I almost succeeded, almost. Jorge was never jealous. He always said that trust was the foundation of any relationship and that my independence was one of the things he admired most about me. But he was also an intelligent man, accustomed to dealing with fake people daily. Years of dealing with clients who feigned enthusiasm to hide mistreatment had taught him to read the small signs, the awkward silences, the sidelong glances, the forced smiles. And I, even unintentionally, overflowed with them. I began to notice that Jorge followed me with more attention. If before he barely noticed how I prepared for events, now he paid attention to every detail. The more intense lipstick, the bolder dresses, the rush to leave home, and the habit of placing my mobile phone face down on the table. I made excuses, smiled, changed the subject, but I knew he smelled the lie. The tension settled in the house like a cheap perfume, strong, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. Intimacy between us almost completely disappeared. Jorge kept trying. He asked questions about the baby, suggested light walks, and played relaxing music for us to unwind, but I responded dryly and automatically. He began to observe me in silence, like someone putting together the pieces of a puzzle with a morbid patience. One night, he put his laptop aside and invited me to watch a series in the living room. I feigned a headache. When he turned off the TV and went upstairs, I realized he had left his cell phone recording on the shelf, and that sent a chill down my spine. The last straw, he would tell me later, was the call I received at 2 a.m. We were sleeping when the phone vibrated. I turned it off so fast I did not even notice the saved name Luis Events. But Jorge saw it. He pretended to be asleep, but he recorded everything. The next day he said nothing. He took me to the ultrasound as if nothing was wrong. He congratulated me on how beautiful I looked, even with the swelling of pregnancy. It was then that I understood. He was waiting for a child, and that was worse than any immediate confrontation. Since then I lived in a constant state of alert. Jorge did not accuse me, he did not treat me badly, on the contrary. He seemed more loving than ever. But there was something in his eyes that gave me chills. A calculated silence, a kind of love that recoiled on itself, preparing to die with dignity. I noticed it. He was not going to act on impulse. He was going to wait for the opportune moment. And when it came, it would be devastating. I started having nightmares. I dreamed of Jorge looking at me with empty eyes, with the baby crying in my arms and no one around. During the day, I found myself looking at my phone, deleting messages, deleting photos, as if that could erase what I had done. But nothing could erase his gaze, that gaze too calm, too analytical. Jorge was putting the puzzle together, and when he finished, I knew my life would never be the same. The birth was silent, not because the baby cried loudly as soon as it was born, but because of the atmosphere between Jorge and me. He held my hand the whole time, took photos, told his family, and fulfilled his role as a father perfectly. But I felt that behind that tired smile an abyss was opening. I could barely look him in the eye when the doctor said, "Dad, do you want to cut the cord?" Jorge simply nodded and cut it as if he were ending something much deeper than the birth of a life. In the following days, Jorge maintained the same attitude, attentive, present, protective, without a trace of explicit anger, distrust, or pain. He did everything with surgical precision. He took care of me after childbirth, prepared bottles, responded to congratulatory messages with joy. But deep down I knew he was just waiting. And the surprise dropped a week later. He entered the room with an envelope in his hand. He sat in the armchair, looked into my eyes, and said in the calmest voice I had ever heard, "I took a DNA test." The floor disappeared beneath my feet. I could not feign surprise. I simply looked down and took a deep breath. Jorge left the envelope on the bed. There was no need to open it. "I am not the father," he said with a coldness that burned more than any shout. I tried to mumble something, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. "Now I want you to tell me everything and without lies." And it was there, with the baby sleeping in the crib beside me, that my life collapsed. I confessed everything: the trip to Puerto Vallarta, the meetings with Marco, Adrian, and Luis. I told him about Tlaquepaque, about the rooms, about not knowing who the father was. The words came out like a blur, without order or logic. I cried, begged for forgiveness, tried to justify myself with phrases I did not even believe. I felt alone, I was needy, it was just a phase. Jorge simply listened. He did not interrupt me. He did not react. He simply let the silence fill every inch of the room. When I finished, I stayed there, sweating, with red eyes and breathless. He looked at the crib, then at me, and said, "You killed what we had." And it was not even for love, it was for vanity. He slowly got up, took the car keys, looked at the baby one last time, and left without slamming the door. He did not shout. He did not break anything. He did not make a scene. But the sound of his footsteps going down the stairs was worse than any slap. I stayed there, paralyzed, my chest burning. For the first time I understood that I had crossed a line of no return, that the damage I had caused was irreversible, and that Jorge was not one of those who explode, but one of those who destroy in silence. In the following days, I tried to call him. I sent him crying audios. I wrote him messages telling him I wanted to fix things, that I loved him, that we needed to talk. Jorge did not answer any. The look in his eyes the day of his confession was etched in my memory like a sentence, and even without saying it aloud, I knew he was preparing something bigger, something that would make everything I felt now seem only the beginning. The invitation was like a lightning bolt. Jorge wanted to organize a celebratory lunch with the family to officially introduce our son, he said with an overly calm smile. I hesitated. It did not make sense. He had not responded to my messages in days, and suddenly he wanted to gather everyone. But my mother was excited, and my in-laws too. It will be good for them to reconnect, they said. I tried to convince myself that maybe Jorge was willing to forgive me. Maybe that lunch would be the beginning of a reconstruction. How foolish. The house was impeccable. Jorge had always been very meticulous, but that day he outdid himself. Fresh floral arrangements on the tables, well-served dishes, soft background music. My parents came dressed as if for an engagement party. Jorge's brothers were there along with their wives, and even a couple of close friends. There was a false cheerfulness, as if everyone felt something was wrong, but no one knew exactly what. I, in a light dress and light makeup, tried to maintain composure. The baby slept peacefully in the stroller next to the porch. In the middle of lunch, between one toast and another, Jorge calmly stood up, raised his glass as if to give a speech. Everyone fell silent, smiling, waiting for sweet words. "I want to thank you all for coming," he began in a calm tone. "Today is an important day, not only because we are introducing my supposed son to you, but because I want to share something with you, something I discovered recently." No one understood instantly until he opened a leather folder and began to distribute envelopes one by one around the table. Inside each envelope were copies of the DNA test and dozens of printouts, WhatsApp messages, photos in hotel rooms, explicit conversations with Marco, Adrian, and Luis. A dense silence invaded the table. Smiles disappeared, hands froze over cutlery. The sound of the garden fountain was the only sound for several seconds. My mother was the first to react. She held the envelope as if it burned her hands. Upon seeing the content, she brought her hand to her mouth and burst into tears. "Lorena, my daughter, no," she whispered with a trembling voice. I tried to speak. I stood up from the chair, not knowing where to look, and began to mumble some excuse, but before I could finish, Jorge raised his hand. "No, now listen." He looked at me with cold contempt, then turned his gaze to the guests. "For months they deceived me. I took care of this pregnant woman believing I was the father. I made plans. I gave myself, and in return I received multiple betrayals and a child from who knows who. Shame glued me to the floor. My throat burned. My father stared fixedly at his plate, motionless. The eyes of Jorge's brother's wife were filled with tears. No one could defend me. Jorge finished his speech without shouting, without dramatizing. He simply dropped the last envelope into my lap. Feel free to finish your meal. Personally, I have lost my appetite. And he left, passed the porch, went down the garden stairs, and disappeared without looking back. The sound of cutlery being returned to plates was more humiliating than any slap. I stood there with blurred vision and trembling hands. All the faces around the table seemed to judge me in silence, and at that moment I realized Jorge did not destroy my reputation with a scandal. He did something much worse. He exposed me with surgical elegance and left me to rot under the weight of my own shame. The divorce papers arrived the next day at lunchtime. A court official rang the doorbell of my parents' house, where I had temporarily taken refuge. My mother refused to sign as a witness. My father did not even come down. I read the trembling papers. Jorge asked not only for the dissolution of the marriage, but also for his name to be erased from the child's birth certificate. Cold, objective, direct. And I, without arguments, without defense, simply cried. I signed what they asked of me. That signature was the final point I had built line by line, betrayal after betrayal. The following days were a whirlwind. First, rumors began to circulate in the corporate environment. I do not know who said it, perhaps someone from the family, perhaps a close friend, but in less than a week my name became synonymous with scandal. The one with the messages, the one who got pregnant by who knows who. Backstage at luxury events where I was a known figure, they began to treat me like a virus. I was removed from important projects. A few days later, the dismissal was disguised as a restructuring, but everyone knew the real reason. It was a ticking time bomb for the agency's reputation. I tried to contact friends in the sector, colleagues who used to laugh with me on launch nights and toast our victories. None responded. They observed, ignored, and disappeared. Even my relatives preferred to keep their distance. The name Lorena, which used to open doors in Guadalajara, now only provoked looks of disapproval and whispers. I was asked to leave a WhatsApp organizers group without warning or explanation. The ostracism was cruel and absolute. In a matter of weeks, I went from being a reference to a public shame. At home, things were not better. My mother cried all the time and could barely look me in the eye. She said she had raised me with values and did not understand where she had gone wrong. My father was silence personified. His judgment was more severe because it was mute. One night, hearing the baby cry, he knocked on the door and said in a firm voice, "Find another place. This is no longer your home." My pleas were in vain. With 2 suitcases and my son in my arms, I was thrown out of the only building left. Without money, without friends, without anything, I ended up in a small rented room in a remote neighborhood of Tonala. Old furniture, damp walls, and the sour smell of abandonment. I breastfed my son with whatever I found. I started selling clothes, bags, anything of value. Formula milk was a luxury. I slept little and cried a lot. There was no longer vanity, makeup, or events, only diapers, hunger, and the echo of my decisions. Jorge did not respond to my attempts to contact him. My name was erased from all documents related to him. It was as if I had never existed in that man's life. There was a morning when I sat on the cold kitchen floor with the baby in my arms and thought, it is over. It is over. Without a support network, without opportunities, without a future. My image was stained, my family repudiated me, and my body, once desired by so many, was now just tiredness and dark circles. The phone no longer rang with invitations, only with demands. And there, between dirty sheets and an improvised bottle, I understood that I had hit rock bottom, or at least what I thought was rock bottom. Marco appeared like an inexhaustible plague. He appeared with a message on my Instagram after months of silence. I heard what happened. Do you want to talk? At first I ignored him, but he insisted. We exchanged some messages and, in a matter of hours, he offered to help me. He said he knew I was jobless, unsupported, and that he could pay the rent, food, and basics for the baby. But the price was not just money. He wanted what he had before, only now with rules. 4 times a week, no excuses, no conditions, full use. I was shocked. I told him I was not that kind of woman, that I still had my dignity. He laughed. Lorena, everyone has seen what you are. That shattered me, not because he was right, but because in a way I was starting to believe it too. I refused the first few days. What pride! But it only took seeing my son cry from hunger and an overdue electricity bill to give in. Marco appeared with an envelope with money and the key to a small furnished apartment. You know what I expect in return? I signed the invisible contract with my own silence. The first encounter was cold and grotesque. He did not kiss me, he did not talk. He simply did what he had to do and dismissed me with a dirty towel. I felt dead inside. It was not sex. It was a transaction, a body used and discarded. In the following days he began to impose schedules, fixed hours, control over my clothes, where I left the baby, even how I shaved. He treated me like merchandise back on the market, worthless, but still useful for anyone who wanted to take advantage of what little was left. I was so ashamed that I stopped looking in the mirror. I could not look myself in the eyes. I avoided leaving the house. I avoided any human contact. I became a shadow of myself. On the days I did not have an appointment with Marco, I could barely get out of bed. I lived on autopilot, changing diapers, warming bottles, washing sheets, and waiting for his next message, which arrived like a sentence. Today at 8 p.m., no delays. Once I tried to refuse. I said I was sick, that I did not feel well. He replied with a single sentence, "Then you can manage without my help." I spent the whole night in a panic, wondering how I would pay the rent at the end of the month. The next day I went to see him without makeup, lifeless in my face. He smiled, satisfied. Now, the real Lorena. It hurt to know that deep down he liked to see me destroyed, to know that I depended on him, that he was the only one who had power over me. There was no longer pleasure or choice, only survival. Every night with Marco took something from me, a little piece of my soul, a trace of the old Lorena. The self-assured woman who shone at luxury events was now a withered figure, with a lowered gaze and deep silences. And I knew this was not the bottom of the well. There was more to fall, and it was coming. The apartment in Tanala was dark, damp, and too silent. The furniture was from Marco's previous house, used pieces, some chipped, others broken. "It is enough for someone like you," he said when he handed me the key. And it was. I did not expect comfort. I just wanted a roof where my son could sleep peacefully. Marco paid the rent directly to the landlord, and in return I belonged to him. 4 times a week, sometimes more, he would send me a message with the time and I would go. I could never say no because a no cost too much. During the day I took care of my son. It was the only time I felt alive. He smiled with the innocence of someone who ignored the chaos around us. I did everything I could to keep him away from that darkness, but at night, when he slept, my second shift began. I prepared myself like a robot. I put on the lingerie Marco asked for and took the bus to his apartment. There was no affection or conversation, only orders, postures, cold orders. Sometimes he would record me with his cell phone, saying it was to remind me who you are now. One night, he brought a professional camera. He told me to pose in obscene poses, with high heels and smudged makeup. He said the more real it was, the better. "I want you as you are now, broken." I cried silently during the photos. He did not even care. He just repeated, "Faster, Lorena, focus. It is the only thing you know how to do now." When he finished, he threw a 500 peso bill in my lap, like someone paying a cleaning lady. I left there trembling, ashamed, feeling my own body as a burden I had to carry out of obligation. My reflection in the mirror became an enemy, my thin face, sunken eyes, dull hair. I no longer looked like myself. Sometimes I thought of old photos, of gala nights, of expensive dresses. Today, I was only left with the feeling that my soul was rotting inside. I could no longer laugh. I could not even pretend it was temporary. It was permanent. I had become the most despicable version of myself, and not even that seemed enough to awaken compassion in anyone. Marco no longer asked about my life, my son, my condition. He only wanted my body, my submission, and the more I obeyed, the more he tested my limits. He made me go see him with a fever. He made me wait naked on the porch while he finished a call. I was not a woman. I was a function, an available body, a broken toy. And yet I kept going because I had no choice, because the only thing left in me was an invisible leash tied to that silent contract. The only thing that kept me going was my son, the only person who still looked at me with love, even without understanding. He gave me a strength I did not even know I still had, but even that hurt because I knew that one day he would understand, that he would ask questions, that he would look at me with Jorge's eyes. And that day I would have to face the cruelest judgment of all, that of someone who loves me but perhaps can never forgive me. The warning came in an anonymous message, "Lorena, is that you?" along with a link. At first I thought it was a scam, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It was an adult forum, one of those clandestine ones with specific sections for amateur videos. At the top of the page, in large letters, was the title, "Guadalajara Executive Sells Herself for Financial Help." The video began with my nervous voice asking them to turn off the lights, then my face, my body in all positions, from various angles. It was clear it was not a cell phone. They were hidden cameras. My stomach churned. I vomited right there on the kitchen floor. I called Marco screaming. He replied coldly, "You knew what you were getting into," and hung up. I tried to report it. I went to the police station, but without proof of no consent, without direct threatening messages, and with the history I had compiled with the deposits, my audios confirming encounters, the complaint faded. A police officer even told me, "It is going to be difficult to prove something like that, ma'am." In other words, it is not worth the effort. The news spread, of course, in private groups, then in WhatsApp screenshots until it appeared on an unknown blog that collected scandals with public figures in Guadalajara. My name, my face, my fall, everything was printed there. The few who still kept a respectful distance completely disappeared. I could no longer go out in the street. In the market, I heard whispers. At the bus stop, two men recognized me and laughed. I started going out only at night, hooded, paranoid, constantly on alert, as if everyone knew I was the woman in the videos. My son began to sense it. He was old enough to realize something was wrong. He asked me why I cried so much, why I avoided opening the windows. One day, while looking at my phone, he saw a notification that had slipped through. He asked me who that man in the photos was. I snatched the phone from his hand, furious. Then I cried in the bathroom in silence. What I feared most was happening. My son was growing up surrounded by shame, fear, and a mother he barely recognized as an adult. I tried to recover in some way. I thought about moving to another city, using a different name, starting from scratch. But with what money? With what resume? What company would hire a woman digitally marked by a sexual scandal? I sent emails. I tried anonymous freelance jobs. I sent my resume without a photo. No response. Those videos had erased any possibility of reconstruction. Marco not only used me, but publicly destroyed me, and the worst part was that he seemed proud of it. Now even my own story condemned me. I could not say anything. I could not defend myself. All that remained was silence, and the harsh certainty that no matter how many mistakes I had made, no one deserved to be turned into human garbage in the eyes of the world. But it was too late. The Lorena who once existed had been buried under pixels, judgments, and a reputation that would never be erased. While I fell, he rose. While I tried to cling to my life with a glimmer of dignity, Jorge rebuilt his with a serenity that tears me apart every time I think of it. He moved to Chapelita, a tree-lined and elegant neighborhood, full of charming cafes and quiet streets. He put down roots there. I bought a new cell phone just to be able to stalk him, shamelessly, as if hiding my obsession would make it less real. His house looks like it is straight out of a magazine, always impeccable, just like him. Jorge did not take long to find someone. A woman named Renata, a sweet, beautiful teacher, everything he deserved or perhaps everything I did not know how to be. I found out from a photo on his cousin's Instagram, the two of them holding hands at a charity event, smiling as if they had never known pain. She does not seem forced, she does not seem selfish. She is calm, and he looks at her with that gaze that was once mine, full of pride and peace. They got married, a small and discreet ceremony in the garden of the house. There was a white cake and colored balloons. I saw it all on social media. They did not block me, but they ignored my existence as if I were a distant noise. Then the children arrived, two beautiful children, Camila and Diego. Jorge posts photos of himself hugging them, laughing, riding bikes, playing in the park. I watch it all in silence, like someone looking out the window at another person's life, because deep down that is what it has become, the life that was supposed to be mine and that I myself wasted. Jorge opened his own real estate agency. Today, he is a benchmark in the city. I saw an interview with him on a local radio talking about dreams, about a home, about starting from scratch. I cried when I heard it because he really did it. He started from scratch and never looked back, never looked for me, never answered me. And you know what? He is right. I do not deserve a place in his new life. I only deserve to observe from a distance, in silence, and understand that I lost a man that no one should ever lose. Sometimes I wonder if he still thinks of me, if he remembers something, anything. But I do not think so. Jorge killed me within himself in the only way a good man knows how, with dignity. He did not scream. He did not get revenge with a scandal. He simply left and won. And that kind of victory hurts more than any humiliation because it is silent and definitive. And I am still alive, always observing from the sidelines, knowing that he had the life I could have built and that I will never deserve it again. Now I work as a night receptionist at a motel on a random avenue in Guadalajara, one of those avenues that no one looks at twice, but everyone knows. I wear a cheap uniform, I tie my hair back with a crooked hairpin and pretend to be invisible because deep down I am. People enter and leave the rooms and do not even look at me. And you know what? It is better if they forget me. It hurts less than if they recognize me. Marco disappeared from my life without a trace after everything exploded on the internet. He discarded me like someone throwing dirty paper in the trash. The videos are still there. A quick Google search and you see me, all of me, unfiltered, without dignity, without defense. My name was marked. I was exposed, judged, condemned, and I never had the opportunity to explain myself. It would not even be worth it. What I did is indefensible, and what I allowed to happen afterwards is even worse. My son is growing up. He is already 13 years old. He is a sensitive and intelligent child, but he carries a question in his gaze that I do not know how to answer. One day, he asked me why he did not have a father, why he had never met him. My throat tightened. I ran from the table, locked myself in the bathroom, and cried like a baby. How can I explain to him that I was a woman who destroyed everything? How can I tell him the truth without dragging him into that same hole? Sometimes he looks at me as if he regrets it, other times as if he is angry. He does not understand why we live like this, in silence, on the sidelines. I can no longer smile. I have nothing left, no friends, no family, no clean name. People look at me with disgust. Some recognize me and look at me mockingly, and I lower my head because I know what I was, I know what I did, and I know there is no turning back. At night, when I get home from the motel, I open Instagram and see Jorge. He travels with his wife and children, Italy, Colombia, parks, laughter, love. I destroyed everything with my own hands, and while he lives in peace, I sleep on an old sofa sharing a musty apartment with my son, trying not to hate myself to the point of not getting up the next day. Sometimes I fail. Sometimes I just exist for him. But I do not know if that will last much longer. I am not telling this story for you to pity me. I know I made a mistake and I am not here to play the victim. I just wanted to know, after everything I have told you, do you think I deserve a second chance, or is this really the end I planted?